Have you ever looked at the price of something and thought, that seems too cheap? Or wondered why we can't seem to get enough of the really good stuff, like clean air or great schools? Well, today, we're going to pull back the curtain on the hidden economic forces that are constantly shaping our world a lot of times without us even realizing it. All right, let's get into it. So here's our game plan. First, we'll uncover some of these hidden costs that are all around us. Then, we'll define what economists are actually talking about with spillovers. We'll look at the bad kind and the good kind, figure out how we can fix the market's little mistakes, and then wrap it all up with one big, simple takeaway. All right, let's kick things off with a fundamental mystery. That price tag you see on a product, it's often hiding a much, much bigger story about its true cost. Not just to you, but to all of us. I mean, just think about it for a second. When a factory makes something we want, it might also create a bunch of smoke, right? You don't get a bill in the mail for the dirty air, but someone, somewhere, is definitely bearing that cost. And on the flip side, when your neighbor gets a vaccine, you're also a little bit safer from getting sick. You get a benefit you didn't pay a dime for. These are the kinds of puzzles we're diving into today. The answer to both of those questions, the factory smoke and the vaccine, it actually boils down to one single core concept in economics. It's really the key that unlocks this whole thing. And that concept is called an externality. Honestly, the easiest way to wrap your head around it is to just think of it as a spillover. Like if you spill your coffee, it might splash onto the person next to you. Well, an economic deal between a buyer and a seller can spill over and affect a third party, someone who had nothing to do with the original transaction. To really get this, we've got to look at two different kinds of costs. On one hand, you have the private cost. That's simple. It's what the factory pays for its steel, its electricity, its workers. But the real story is the social cost. This is the big one. It's the factory's private cost plus the external cost of that spillover effect on everybody else. It's the true price that society as a whole ends up paying. So, let's start with the kind of spillover we're all familiar with, the ones that create some, not so great consequences. We call these negative externalities. They're usually tied to what economists call demerit goods. Think things like cigarettes or industrial pollution. Now, the main problem here is that because the producer isn't paying that full social cost, they're not paying for the health impacts or the dirty air, for example, the product looks way cheaper to make than it actually is. And of course, when something seems cheap to make, the free market makes way too much of it. Okay, I know this graph might look a little intense, but it tells a really simple story, I promise. That bottom blue line, MPC, that's the private cost, just what the factory pays. But look up at that top line, the MSC, that's the social cost. And it's higher because it includes the cost of the pollution. Now, where does the free market operate? Right there at QE, where its private costs meet demand. It is completely, totally ignoring that higher, true social cost. And this is the result. See that little red triangle? Economists have a fancy name for it, dead weight welfare loss. But all that really means is harm. It's the damage done to society. See, the best place for us to be producing is at Q1, where the true social cost is factored in. But the market just keeps going all the way to QE. That triangle is a picture of the total damage we all suffer from making all those extra units. It's a visual of the market failing. Okay, but it's not all doom and gloom. Let's flip the script and move to the other side of the coin, because these spillovers can also be incredibly positive. These are called positive externalities, and they come from merit goods, things like education or healthcare. And here, the problem is the complete opposite. When you get an education, you get a personal benefit, a better job, maybe. But society also benefits from having a smarter, more skilled population. The thing is, you don't get paid for that extra social benefit, so the market doesn't really see its full value. And what happens? These things get underproduced. And look, the graph shows us exactly what's going on. The bottom line, MPB, is a private benefit. That's what you or I get from, say, going to college. But the top line, MSB, is the total social benefit, the value that everyone gets. And notice where the market produces, down at quantity QE, because it's only looking at the private part. The ideal amount for all of us is way up there at Q1. We're falling short. So what's the red triangle this time? Well, it's not damage. It's what we call a potential welfare gain. It represents all the amazing benefits, the innovation, the better communities, the economic growth that society is missing out on because we're not producing enough. It is literally all the opportunity the free market is just leaving on the table. So, If the market gets it wrong, making too much of the bad stuff and not nearly enough of the good stuff, how do we fix it? Well, this is where governments often decide to step in. And they have a whole toolkit to try and nudge the market in the right direction. To discourage the bad stuff, they can tax it. You see this with cigarette taxes. To encourage the good stuff, they can give subsidies, like grants for education. Or they can just make direct rules, like setting firm pollution limits. The goal is always the same. Try to close that gap between the private outcome and the social one. The big idea behind all of these policies has a name: internalizing the externality. It's a pretty simple idea, really. You want to make the person or the company causing the spillover actually feel its financial effect. So you force the polluter to pay for the damage, or you help the student get more of the reward. It's all about making the price tag finally tell the true story. So after all these costs and benefits and graphs, what's the one big idea that we should really walk away with from all this? It's really just this. The price tag doesn't always tell the whole story. The price you pay for an item is just one tiny piece of a much larger puzzle, a puzzle that's full of hidden costs and hidden benefits that affect every single one of us. And that leaves us with one last thought. Now that you have this new lens, this new way of seeing the world, just think about your own life for a minute. What's one hidden cost from a product you use every day, or one hidden benefit from something your neighbor does that you never really noticed before? Because once you start looking for them, you'll start seeing externalities absolutely everywhere.